fatigue. Is fatigue a symptom of CAPS? Yes, it is. If you're a patient, you have no doubt. But if your family and friends think you're faking it or milking it, or your doctor thinks you've got some other dietary or lifestyle factor causing the fatigue, or also just doesn't believe you, here are 3 biochemical explanations for why we get fatigue in CAPS. Firstly, white blood cells called monocytes are the main producers of NLRP3. Monocytes can also turn into macrophages and dendritic cells that hang out in your tissues. If you have CAPS, your NLRP3 proteins are thought to be in a primed state with a high affinity to bind ATP, the energy unit that is required for this primed state. So point 1, when NLRP3 is mutated, as in CAPS, ATP is sequestered away from other metabolic processes. Secondly, these white blood cells, when in a pro-inflammatory state, switch to glycolysis for metabolism in the same way that cancer cells do. It's known as the Warburg effect, named after the guy who discovered it and won a Nobel Prize for it. Glycolysis is the pathway to the Krebs cycle, named after the guy who discovered it and won a Nobel Prize for it. It turns out metabolites from the Krebs cycle are important for the production of inflammatory cytokines. But for now, let's just consider that ATP production is less efficient through glycolysis than other metabolic pathways. So point 2, ATP output from glycolysis is less efficient than other metabolic pathways, and coupling that with point 1, ATP is sequestered for NLRP3 priming. Thirdly, glucose, the units that go into glycolysis, are prioritized to cells dealing with inflammation. Inflammatory monocytes and macrophages need a lot of glucose to put through glycolysis to make the metabolites they need for the inflammatory processes and products. This is why we see inflammation linked with diabetes, where insulin resistance occurs as glucose is preferentially sent to immune cells and not available for other tissues. So point 3, when we are inflamed, our immune cells hog the energy source, so our other tissues have a little bit less to work with. Putting it all together, CAPS patients have a genetic condition, not caused by any diet or lifestyle factors, where our NLRP3 proteins are stuck in a shape that causes prioritization of the energy source glucose to immune cells that inefficiently produce energy unit ATP because of the Warburg effect, and ATP energy units are sequestered for inflammatory processes such as NLRP3 priming. This is really only the tip of the iceberg. Metabolism is complicated. Hopefully this is enough to convince any skeptics that fatigue makes complete sense biochemically in context of CAPS.